So this is a continuation of a series of videos talking about traditional Indigenous European practices and how they are similar to other Indigenous practices that you may not be aware of and you think only belong to certain cultures. So if you watch the video, I forget what it's called, but I'll put a link above if you could guess this Indigenous tribe. And it discusses a lot of these practices. So I want to elaborate on them so that you know that in the Northern tradition, if you're European descent, you had similar practices to a lot of other Indigenous cultures. So the one that I want to talk about today is called UTISETA. And that means basically sitting out. And this would be equivalent to a vision quest in Native American culture. In the Ynglinga saga, there is a reference to Odin laying down as if he was asleep or even dead, not moving at all, and changing himself into a bird or some other type of animal, and leaving his body to get answers either for himself or for someone else. I'll put the whole actual reference to it in a slide. So when I read that, I see that he's practicing incubation. And so if you've ever purchased that ritual from me, it's a combination of Galder and incubation. And I learned this on my own, and only did I confirm what was spontaneously happening to me, I found years later in these Norse texts. So that is part of, I think, when you are initiated as a shaman from the gods, you learn these things, you're spirit taught. And that's what happened. And so that's how all these initial practices even started, is that it happened to the shamans and they were taught how to do certain things, and then they inform others about them. And that's what happened to me. Although at the time, again, I didn't know what was happening to me. I just went with it. Eventually, I just surrendered. And so when I read that about Odin, I knew exactly that he was practicing incubation. It's a shamanic technique. It's talking about the hame. And so if you've watched the previous video about the witch's fetch, I talk about the hamingya. And so it's kind of getting technical. So the hame is your what I call like the second skin. It's your energy body. Witches and shamans, they're able to detach that energy body or that second skin that they've developed, and they're able to detach, and they call it faring forth or journeying, whatever you want to call it, and go to different dimensions and worlds to get answers to their questions. So the hame is the actual energy body, that the second skin that you've developed. The hamingya is the shape it takes. When you detach your hame, it becomes a hamingya, and you can shape shift that. So if you've watched the previous videos, I shape shift into a fox. I've shape shifted into a being that was half human, half animal. So you shape shift to whatever you need to at that time. I feel like I don't have a lot of control over it. It just happens. That's what is talking about in reference to Odin. He was doing a shamanic work. So that's part of going into nature and sitting out, performing the UTISETA, is really you're getting answers either for yourself or for someone you're working with, or you're getting answers of how you can help Earth itself. And this was very common in a lot of Indigenous cultures. There's rock paintings of people going and sitting out and doing these vision quests. And as we know, Native Americans, they go out in nature alone searching for answers or receiving their power animal and things like that. So this is not unusual in animistic cultures. In the northern tradition, there's a lot of times you would go to fairy mounds and you would lay on fairy mounds, and there was your ancestors or the fae, or you deal with the beings of the land to give you answers. And if you've ever done the incubation ritual, which I do with people, when you're in it and your eyes are closed, you can sometimes feel presences around you. And most of the time, those are your ancestors, because I call them in when I'm doing the Galder for you. So beings will come around when you get into this state. Now, I know in vision questing, there's fasting going on. And so there are cases where you go out into nature and you don't eat. You're in solitude. It's you by yourself. I've done it for just several hours and been able to do it. Most of the time you go overnight or for several nights until you have an experience. I notice that if I am somewhere that is known to be like a sacred spot or a site, that if I go into incubation, I actually get sucked into that area. It will take you if they know that you have the ability to fare forth or journey. You should always have a purpose when you're going into the UTISETA or journeying. You're not going to these other dimensions just to see what it's like, or it's an amusement park. You may run into trouble if you're doing it for that purpose. You always have to have a purpose. Like I said, you're going with searching an answer or seeing how you can help. Either somebody else, yourself, or the earth, like I said. And I know when this first started happening to me, I felt like I was just going inside my body. And that's not unusual to have that feeling where you're just inside yourself before that you go into the underworld or into another dimension, because you do have blocks. I've had times when I was flying inside of myself and I bumped into like an invisible barrier. So that was something that my mind didn't want me to search, or it was a block I had, an emotional block, something. And so I knew that I had work to do to get through that barrier. So I would advise people first, when you do incubation, it's to connect with yourself and to explore your inner self, because you're not going to be able to have positive experiences even in this regular 3D life with other humans and this dimension. You're not going to have good experiences if you are able to journey into other dimensions if you haven't cleared up your own issues. Things will be mirrored back to you. So there's a couple different ways that I can go into incubation. Again, it's explained in my incubation ritual video. So I can go in, I have some keywords that put me into incubation when I'm singing Galder that are specific for me to get me into that state of trance. You'll also see sometimes in my videos, you'll see me slightly rocking. And so I do, even talking on these videos, will sometimes go into trance, and you'll see me going back and forth. And that's just me bringing up information that needs to be shared, or I have my fetch around me giving me this information. And so rocking will also put me into a trance state. But most of the time I am laying down when I go into trance and I journey or fare forth, or whatever you want to call it. There's also a technique in the northern tradition called going under the cloak. And it's kind of like a sensory deprivation, and that really helps me, where I plug my ears with earplugs. I cover my eyes. In the past, they would wear cloaks and they'd pull down their hood. That seems to work really well for me, because I immediately go inside, and then I'm able to detach. Most of the time I'm going into the inner earth. And there's also, which I just learned recently, and it happens to me too when I am doing Galder just for Earth and doing a ritual, I'll be singing Galder and then all of a sudden I'll yawn. I was reading that it is documented that Völvas would do yawning, and even Siberian shamans do it. And I noticed when I would yawn, a different energy would come through. So I think that when I do Galder, certain spirits or entities will kind of take over, and they sing through me to do whatever needs to be done. And then I'll yawn and I'll feel a totally different energy come through, and I will sing differently. And so yawning may be part of it too, if you ever experience that when you're trying to go into trance or anything like that. It's almost like you're breathing in the messages, or you're breathing in the energy of the entity that wants to communicate through Galder. I can do incubation in my home, but the most amazing experiences I've had are out in nature, in one particular site, which I've shared on Patreon. Yeah, if you go to sacred sites, it's easier. So it is just it's a shamanic practice. I think it even helps if you feel like you're getting sick to go into this incubation and go into trance and really sink into yourself and ask your body kind of what's going on. It's really a really important practice, and you just might get visions and feel entities around you. A lot of the times the spirits of the land are really interested in what you're doing, and you'll feel them around you. Or you'll get a vision of an animal, or an animal will come through your spot that would be unusual maybe for that area, and they don't seem to be afraid of you or anything like that. And that is usually a sign that that's the energy that wants to work with you at that time. So it's just very similar to vision questing. You really get to know yourself during this practice. So again, if you're of European descent, you can practice vision questing, and it's called UTISETA. All right, and that is it for today, and I will see you on the next video. Bye-bye.